So this is a working session, and the intent is to have a lot of interaction, collaboration, and feedback. The reason we're having this meeting is because we need your feedback. We have one traveling mic, which we're going to pass around. And do you mind being the runner for it? No, I'm kidding. So I asked a few of the security committee members to join me on stage. Okay, so you'll come up in a few minutes, Mike, and Chan, are you here? I don't see you. There you are. Whenever, if you like, there are speakers. There's mics there. Okay, so we're online, we're live, we're good. We can start? Okay, hi everybody, and for those of you online as well. This is a joint committee meeting of many of the committees of the IDSG, and it is to provide an update on the functional model. Well, let me jump in. This is Adam Madlin. I think by now most people know who I am. I'm the chair of the Security Committee. So what we're going to do over the next hour is provide a brief update on the functional model and its components, and then look to get into a dialogue, specifically with committees and or committee members that have a need for the functional model, that envision using the functional model. We're at a point that we need your input to help us complete this deliverable and make it suit your purposes, make it fulfill the needs that that the different committees have. So the objective is to get feedback in this session, and I just realized that I'm going to take some notes here, but I also will need some assistance from any other committee members out there to do that. So we have a co-presenter on the phone, Sitharama Durba, will be presenting part of this presentation. So we're going to talk about what work we have envisioned and underway to complete the functional model, and then want to get into a dialogue which helps us to understand what your expectations are of the functional model. So we have an hour for that. So we're going to review the current status. We're going to describe the proposed components, and we're going to discuss the latest component that we've been working on called the interaction model, of which Sitharama will lead that discussion. And then we're going to discuss and share, where we go from here. So before we jump in, it's important to know that this is still very much a work in process. It is not complete. Really only one component is whole unto itself, and others are still in process. So we want people to realize that we are sharing this early, because we need that feedback. We have been interacting with had joint calls with the use case ad hoc group and other members of different committees to start to help us round out that picture as we did a use case gap analysis versus the functional model. Part of the challenge that we've dealt with, goes back even to comment I made early this morning on the value prop discussion, that aspects of the plan, of the direction of the IDSG, and ultimately in some regard, how we position the value prop, are impacting the functional model to a degree and can impact it. And so, we're working to close all those gaps so that we have the right direction and we can complete this work. One other note is we have not made a decision that this is a deliverable that will go through formal IDSG approval or be used externally. It could very well be that, but it is a feeder, a component into other deliverables, and that's what we're trying to get at here. So we're still working through that part of it. The Security Committee has been focusing on functional model work for since last fall. You know, it's been a very interesting process. We've made quite a bit of progress, but we've had some fits and starts, to be honest, and that, you know, relates to the feedback I shared, that is still very much in process, that is not locked in stone by any stretch, but, you know, we feel that there are clearly aspects of it that are usable. So the first component is really an introduction for it. In any package that we distribute, you know, we will include this introduction so people understand what it is and why and what's its purpose. So I'm going to go through that real quickly. We think that's important, and we do have an introduction that is drafted and still under review. So, you know, the functional model should provide the context for discussions of identity system elements, the ecosystem, and the framework. Identify and describe common elements, including the operations, functions, roles, and activities applicable across a broad set of ecosystem use cases, identity use cases. And then provide a grammar and structure to describe the ecosystem and framework in action. It's not a model of the IDSG, but it addresses and enables all these other aspects. That's important to know. We're not, you know, creating a model. We're creating a way to describe aspects, you know, the broadest set of aspects of the ecosystem. So how we see it, envision it being used, and this is part of the terms of reference that is published for the functional model. So to explore comparability among identity and trust frameworks. Articulate a model of identity functions with elements recognizable. Provide a reference tool and building blocks for efforts and deliverables of the IDSG. And that's, you know, why we're here, what we're here to discuss right now, such as privacy and security evaluation methodology, which I'll touch on later, and likely other core deliverables. And then support development of of IDSG requirements and best practices, very important part, of course. So many of you should have seen this. This is what we call the functional elements deliverable. This is the diagram, and there is a set of descriptions across the top of the core operations, and the functions are down below. It's not the intent of this session to go through these in detail. This has been published and available on the Functional Model Wiki page for quite a number of months. We presented it way back in Atlanta initially. So the status is that it has been approved by the Security Committee, and we have shared it with a number of other committees and received some feedback. We could use more feedback. This, you know, is complete per the Security Committee, but it's still considered, you know, can be enhanced, improved, modified. But it is, you know, complete for purposes of further other activities, other related needs. And then we did start to share the next, oh, here we go, sorry. The next core component, and we're calling this the functional model layers. Very, very briefly, do I have a, no, that won't work? Okay. I don't have a, I was trying to point. The bottom block is the functional elements that, you know, are shown here. Okay? It is the core operations, and it adds the different roles that we envision. As I said, the functional elements describe the broadest, attempt to describe the broadest set of interactions in an identity transaction or ecosystem. But, you know, we early on realized there are other aspects of the identity ecosystem that are necessary for it to be fulfill its requirements, to support it, And so we added a layer for interoperability and a layer for governance. And each of those additional layers involves activities and roles. And we are still, this is still under development. We are still flushing this out. We are still validating it. We are still analyzing it against other models and use cases, and you'll see where we're going next with it. So as you see here, it identifies the activities and roles across digital identity transactions, and it's to use to capture the requirements and means of carrying them out, and dependent on use cases and interactions involved. This is considered still in development, not approved completely by the Security Committee. And so, part of our ask is to get more assistance in fleshing this out, as this is a core deliverable of the IDSG this year to fulfill the plans, the objectives that we're being tested, which we're going to learn more about next, fleshing out the ID Ecosystem Framework Plan. So now we go to the next chunk of work that we are undertaking, and Sitarama has been central to driving that part of the work, and so I've asked him to help describe it and to go over some of the work he's led. Sitarama, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me, Adam?
Yes, everybody can hear, right? It could be a tiny bit louder, I think, but I'm a little...
Okay, I will try to be a little bit louder.
No, you're good. You're good now. You're good now. So if you,
okay,
tell me when you want to change slides, and please take it from here for the next several slides.
Okay, thanks a lot, Adam. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry to be calling in. So I think Adam covered, what has happened so far, in terms of providing, delivering, identifying the core functions of identity ecosystem, right? And then the next step, which has been started, was to take it to the next level and introduce the interoperability layers and the governance layer, right? So in terms of the interaction model that we have been talking about for the past 2 months, what we are trying to do is essentially take the use cases and then take the functional elements and create some kind of a picture, right? Whatever it is called, interaction model or something else, but create a picture so that we can as the slide is showing, harmonize the terminology, operations, and entities used in all use cases, and combine the use cases into one overall user experience, so that we can understand we have the functional elements, we have the use cases, which are like loosely coupled at this point, but then if we start putting those two things together, we can start seeing a complete picture as from a user perspective. And once we do that, I think we can identify, once we have the interactions kind of visualized, we can then put in where we need governance and where we need interoperability. And specifically, I think we can start identifying or putting in context the security requirements, the privacy requirements, or the trust framework requirements, as to, how can we say that, or where do we think a particular security requirement is originating from, or it is essential? Similarly, where is the particular privacy requirement originating from, and how that requirement should be actually formulated?
Should we move to the next slide, Sitarama, the first interaction?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, we're there.
Thanks, Adam. So this is our first attempt at kind of like, creating that interaction model. I mean, it could be done better. I think there are some backup slides in the deck which provide another way of visualizing the same thing. But this is one way, right? I mean, we take sample use case and put the actors in the boxes on the top and see how the interactions are supposed to be going on for the particular use case. If you don't mind, go to the next slide, Adam.
We are there. We're there.
Okay. So what this slide is showing is that, once we create that interaction model between the actors in the use case, we can start, putting our fingers on these interactions and say, hey, this is where we need, trust. For example, in the second line, the RA or IDP is asking the user for attributes and proof of the attributes. And before the user can provide them, they need some level of assurance, some level of trust, telling them that yes, this is okay. I mean, I trust this particular RA or IDP, right? And similarly, when the IDP receives those attributes, it needs a way to verify the proof that has been provided. So we're talking about interoperability, we're talking about security there. And so on and so forth, right? So essentially, the idea is that once we have the picture, then we will be able to kind of contextualize the other requirements that we are talking about. Next slide.
So I think we're moving to the next slide is the uses inventory.
Okay.
We have other examples. Do you want to continue? Go ahead.
I just want to conclude, right? I mean, I know that we want to encourage a broader dialogue and discussion on this. Just as a conclusion, I really don't know what is the ultimate picture going to look like, and what is the best way to encourage or enable discussions like this, like in the security requirements or the privacy requirements and so on. But as you can see, I think this is a first step, right? I mean, we're starting down this road so that we can harmonize the use cases, we can bring in the functional elements and then start using them for discussing the other requirements.
So thank you, Sitharama. We have completed interaction model on at least one other use case and are working through additional ones. In addition, we've also had some discussion within the committee that, how the interaction models fit in with the overall functional model. And, we've also used the term, sort of reference designs of common or core use cases. And so, that's also in the mix, that we document sort of a set of critical use cases that are in most transactions, and they sort of serve as examples or proofs of the functional model. So I probably didn't do the best job of describing it at the beginning, but today the functional model is made up of 4 key components: an introduction, the functional elements deliverable, the functional layers, which controls roles and activities. And then whatever, where we're at today is working through additional critical aspects of the functional model to describe it, to provide examples, to enable it to be used in the full fashion that we've described, as we point out here as one example. So, Jim, you'd like to ask a question? Okay, we have okay. We also have a microphone here. Mike, can you just grab that and maybe help a little bit? Would you mind? Thank you so much. We need the mic on. So we have a question in the hall. John? Can we get that on?
Oh.
There we go.
There we go. Hi, Sitharama. This is Jim Fenton.
Hi, Jim.
The thing that confuses me, or that I think is strange about this, the diagram that's currently up, which is slide 11, the sample proofing and credential issuance, is that it talks about the IDP. It combines the registration authority and IDP roles, and talks about that role asking for attributes, providing attributes, and essentially the proofing going on there. Whereas the NSTIC model has this separation between IDPs and attribute providers. And I really see this as being a function having to do with the attribute provider and not the IDP. And I think of proofing as something that should be done with the attribute provider. And then I'm a little fuzzy about registration authorities and credential service providers and the other things that are involved in setting that up and so forth. But can you comment about that? I'd like to see us embrace that separation between attributes and IDPs better, because I can think of a lot of situations where you would want to have different attribute providers that provide maybe the same attribute to in different spheres. Like maybe I've got a healthcare provider, attribute provider that can assert my date of birth, or I've got a government-focused attribute provider. And there might be different situations where I want to source it from different places, but I don't see that as ever coming from the IDP.
So Sitharama, do you want to answer that, or would you like me to go ahead?
Sure. Okay. Thanks a lot, Jim. I think that's a very good observation and question. So first point is that, this use case is as it is documented on the IDESK website, right? So I just took as the use case has been written, and then put the sequence of actions as they are documented currently. Now, I think the points that you're making essentially are good points, and I think this kind of exercise actually will benefit us to identify those kind of viewpoints, right? So once we start putting out, hey, this is how we are seeing the proofing and credential issuance, for example, as it is coming from the use case as it has been documented, we can then make changes, right? And saying that, hey, this is exactly not accurate, or this is not how it is supposed to be, but this needs to be different. So I think that we will need to do this, have these conversations, and then start harmonizing the use cases, not just with respect to one use case, this particular one, but across use cases.
So thank you, Sitharam. If I can add to that also, it's the truth is, as I said before, this is still very much a work in process, and the stage we're at with the interaction model is making a determination of what it is, how it is, and does it help us achieve what we want. So some of those details of the exact architecture and breakdown, we just haven't vetted through thoroughly. So this is just the start of the process to understand, is this usable? Does this help the functional model meet all the requirements that it has to fulfill? So there is more work to this and other aspects. So that's a very good input, and it's a well-known case, and we just ran with this, and we also got preoccupied with other business of the committee and didn't get back to flushing out all the details. So we have another example of this. We have more detail of the functional model, functional layers, the introduction. They are all posted to the wiki, and really what I was hoping to be able to get to at this point is, for some reason, it's not advancing. Okay, then I'm going to need to go to the next slide in just a quick moment. So I'm calling it an inventory, for lack of a better term. This is a point where we would really appreciate feedback. we are, the functional model has been identified as a core deliverable for other deliverables, other key work products of the IDSG. The reason the Security Committee undertook it is that we are intending to use it to be a basis for the development of our security evaluation methodology, which we're very anxious to get to but haven't been able to yet. And so we're looking, and we know there's interest in it, but we need to hear with some more specificity and clarity how are the other committees envision using it, and what are their needs. So, we'd like to have that dialogue, and if we don't get to it today, I'd very much encourage that others provide me with feedback. You can send it directly to me, or you can send it to the security work group listserv, and we need to hear what it is you need from this, and I'll get to your question in just a quick sec. Let's discuss that inventory and requirements. And so we have a couple questions in the room coming up, and I'd love feedback.
Okay, I'm Bob.
How do you envision using it? What do you need from it?
I'm Bob Pinero. I'm chair of the Financial Services Committee.
Hi, Bob.
And, I'm supposed to give an update on my committee in a little while, but I think you brought up something here that maybe I could address. A lot of the value proposition that's wrapped up around NSTIC goes to the idea of federated identity, so that you've got a credential service provider issuing a credential that can now be used to authenticate to the various relying parties. And I think there's a slide that you didn't show here, but shows that basic authentication where you pick a credential service provider, or you pick an identity provider, you get redirected, you authenticate to the identity provider, and then something goes back to the relying party. I think you should broaden the authentication, I don't know if you call it framework, use case stuff, to include something also that conforms to the FIDO Alliance kind of proposals, where what they're saying is once you've established your identity with the relying party, you don't necessarily need to go back to a third-party identity provider every time you want to log in. It's possible that the relying party could simply provision some kind of strong, high-assurance token onto your device, and you can authenticate directly to the relying party. And I think that comes up in financial services, because I don't think the financial services community has really bought into the federated identity idea in a lot of cases. A couple of reasons. One is they think, well, if I as a bank, if I give a credential to my customer and that they can use that credential to log in someplace else, now I'm helping my customer to log into another bank, and I'm helping my customer go to my competition. So why would I want to do that? So I don't think this idea of a federated credential always makes sense in all cases. So I think the functional model needs to take into account those situations where I should be able to strongly authenticate to a relying party. I don't necessarily need to identify myself. It could be just on the basis of a pseudonym. And I should be able to bind some kind of strong token that I can carry on my device without needing to go to an identity provider every time. So that's my
I appreciate that feedback. And my initial reaction, I might be mistaken, is that the functional model is not implementation specific, but it does address that. It addresses the need to authenticate the end user, but it doesn't identify what technology or how it is. Is it device? Is it is there is the CSP, IDP involved in every interaction? Where I come from, what I'm familiar with is, there is a communication on every authentication. But, I certainly know that there's technologies that are moving that to the end device and eliminating some of that. And so we're not specifying that. We're just identifying that there is an authentication function that has to be performed in some fashion and various degrees of assurance.
Yeah, and I guess I'd like to respond to that a little bit, because it's also come up in the use cases. Some of the use cases have been a little bit more specific in terms of implementation alternatives, and people say, well, you shouldn't be saying that when you're defining a use case. You should just be stating a problem. So maybe even that pertains, like you say, to the functional model definition. But at some point, somewhere along the line, I think somebody needs to get specific and nail down some details, because one of the things we keep hearing, and we heard it in the presentation this morning, is passwords are broken. We need better ways to authenticate people to websites than just using passwords. But other than one or two use cases that have been submitted, I really haven't seen anything yet that is going to explain how we fix the password problem. But maybe that's later on down the road when we get to the point of defining requirements and recommendations. There'll be some specific alternatives that ID ESG will give its stamp of approval on. You know, I'm not sure how it's going to work down at that point, but at some point I think we need to sort of nail down some specifics and not just operate at this high level, you know, realm. If we're gonna
Very valid point. We hear you. We understand that. I don't necessarily.
Actually, Adam, I just want to say.
Go ahead, Sitharama.
I think Bob's comments probably are more in the context of the use cases themselves. I think what we are trying to do in the functional model is not exactly craft the use cases ourselves, but to take advantage of the work that's being done in the use cases group.
Yes, and so the functional model needs to be able to describe that and allow for that, and us to be able to communicate about those needs. It's not the purpose of the functional model to be implementation specific and cover every need, but that is something that the functional model needs to be able to support. So very much, agree with that. Over here, introduce yourself again.
Adrian Gropper. Adam, I want to make sure I understand this correctly, so I'd like you to back up one slide to the, and just tell me if I understand this correctly. Let's assume that in the three lanes here are: the user has a personal data store, the middle lane is, let's say, the Veterans Administration Hospital, where they're going to be seen for the first time and they're going to register, and the credential service provider is my iPhone, as managed by Apple with whatever biometrics and other security features it has. Am I understanding correctly that I could map that into exactly this scenario that you show there? In other words, I, as the user, get to choose how I want to be registered with the VA hospital, with the institution, using my personal data store as the source of the attributes. And then that is bundled and presented in some way, privacy-preserving way, to Apple as the credential service provider, which, using FIDO or some other mechanism, basically assurance, adds some level of assurance, institutional assurance, to the identity that I've presented to the VA.
I believe the answer is yes. I want to clarify again. This is a work in process. This is a simple sample representation. Okay, so basically, the functional model and the functional layers, it is our desire, very need, that the functional model and the functional layers describes the broadest set of identity transactions. So it needs to be able to be used to consistently describe that specific case, which is a fairly common case, in the healthcare environment. This is one very simple transaction that might or might not fit into that. I think it did fit, but you can easily, create complexities that this doesn't fit. And this is essentially, a use case based on the functional model in one way. You can almost look at it. And we're using this as part of the tool to help us complete the next step. So as you heard Sitharama describe, where he is believing that what this will do is enable us to identify the core points in any of these interactions that we need to focus on that have governance implications, security implications, privacy implications, and that's what these little arrows are representing. So this is just one representation of that.
Glad to hear that.
Okay, another Dr. Tom.
Tom Sullivan, Healthcare. This is really kind of sounds like a dumb question, but it's pretty basic. When you're asking for feedback from different committees and constituents, I want to bring up the example. I don't know whether feedback from healthcare is working to any of the other committees, but I wanted to bring up a situation, and I know you said you didn't want to talk about the functional elements in detail, but you might remember a couple of months ago you sent around that design and model to a bunch of us.
Yes.
And we gave you feedback. We discussed it at one of our meetings, and we said we felt
Time
that
stamping.
you got it. You do remember. And so we're wondering whether or not that actually made it into the functional elements, because what we got was a reply that said, yes, thank you, healthcare, from you. We received your suggestion. But we never heard about any resolution, whether or not it was a good idea, bad idea. And we had gotten into, here I'm standing at NIST looking at the hour, minutes, and seconds, and we had been debating milliseconds and nanoseconds, and at least in healthcare. We didn't go into that, nor did we talk about universal time as part of the timestamp. But we're just wondering, is the method of communicating feedback to you, is it working? Did you make a decision, yes or no, or is that still sort of, in the hopper to be, because we did feel strongly that a timestamp was important as one of the functional elements.
So, first of all, it was my responsibility to close the loop, and I did not. And so that is my fault, and I sincerely apologize. We absolutely did talk about it within our working team who developed the functional element diagram, and did discuss it and did agree that it's part of it, but that it just doesn't need to be independently represented, and that those, there are time elements, place elements, location elements, and other, in many cases, metadata for each of those subfunctions that are necessary. And it's just the functional element diagram is not to that degree of detail. So
Okay. We would still
see
make
it
the
as very
case.
much as a requirement, as included, and this is still fairly high level, and it was my fault for not closing the loop.
Well, it's
beyond
maybe
that I
my
did.
fault for not bugging you.
No, not at all.
I wasn't
so
sure.
Thanks for bringing that up again.
Okay, thanks.
So far, we've had all the vertical committees speak up and ask questions. So, they're the use cases, right? They're, the relying parties. So I need some other input. Is Kathy volunteering on how other committees see themselves, what requirements they have of the functional model, so that we make sure we're not missing anything as best as we can. Kathy, did you?
So from
I can't see you real well, but.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
From the Standards Committee perspective, we actually proposed this effort back at the very first IDESG meeting
Oh,
in
right,
August
you're
of
taking,
2012.
credit, huh? No.
No, but I wasn't to
You
explain
took credit
the
and
reason.
then passed the responsibility elsewhere and the
We-
problems.
We proposed it, but we were looking for a champion, and we're extremely grateful that you stepped forward, you and the Security Committee stepped forward to be that champion. But the reason that we thought it was important to start with is, as we were looking at our mission in standards, we recognized that standards in and of themselves, without a context, are not particularly useful. And so as we would start to try to identify what standards needed to be employed within the ecosystem as part of the identity ecosystem framework, we needed to understand kind of a conceptual architecture of that ecosystem so that we could identify where the standards would apply. And so, for example, an easy example might be that you have two functional components. There may be an interface between those components. In order to achieve interoperability, there may be a standard that would apply in that particular situation. And so that's where we thought that the functional model was important. And so I don't know that I'm going to give you any specific requirements or changes to what you've already done, but just to understand how we were intending to use that, particularly as we're trying to identify gaps in the standards that would apply to the ecosystem.
Thank you, Kathy. I see another brave committee member, Dave. Can
yeah,
you just introduce yourself quick?
David Temashak from the MPO and TFTM committee. And we just had a discussion with the Privacy Committee on requirements and requirements development. And one of the contexts for requirements development is to look at functional model, basic functional model to see where there are data interfaces, data exchanges, data that may need to be protected throughout the functional model, and to take a look at very high-level sets of requirements that are both the derived requirements that the committees have already been provided, but put that within the context of the functional model where real interactions between parties, different parties, with data exchanges occur where both security is impacted, potentially privacy requirements are impacted, or other user access is impacted to put into the context of real transactions. So the functional model has real application in looking at requirements development.
So thank you. Jack.
So Jack Seuss, Tifton. So I'm going to give just a slight twist on what David had said. And so I agree with everything that David had said, actually. What I'm not certain about is this is one of what might be many functional models, depending on what we decide we're going to be producing and how we're going to be going about doing those things. And so what I'm a little worried about is that the functional model is defining right now what it is that we're going to do, because this is what we have tried to pull together through the Security Committee. And for example, as David was saying, we had a conversation with the Privacy Committee. The way Georgia Tech is thinking about electronic trust marks may be a very different functional model that you would develop than what was currently there. And so I would just like to be thinking about the fact that this may need to be written in a way that it could evolve fairly quickly as we have further discussions about exactly what it is we're going to be producing and how it's going to in fact work in that. Because I'm just never been completely sure that this is going to help me define the requirements if we do something radically different. And that's been where I keep sort of scratching my head.
Fair enough. Did you want to comment on that, Mike, or I have a comment?
Well,
if you go ahead.
I learned that sitting down doesn't constitute being in line, so I figured I should just stand.
So just
it wasn't obvious at all.
In response to Jack, or something different?
Actually, so I think both Jack and Kathy just said very important things about the importance of context and about tools to get to requirements. So my question is about end game for the functional model. We have this thing. No one's really lobbed particularly huge complaints about it at this point. We've got this interaction model, which we at one point were calling reference implementations or reference models. And as far as I can tell, the goal of it is to describe the use of the functional model. But now we're asking what's the use of the functional model. So I just want to make sure that we haven't tossed ourselves into a spiral here when really we should just be closing the deliverable out. We have this thing and no one has really provided substantive comments about how it needs to change. So to me that says let's just finalize it and move forward. And I'm a little worried that we're really digging down on something that we don't need to when this is just a tool for other deliverables.
Fair enough. And so, believe it or not, one of the things I was hoping to get some feedback on is, we've been working at this for quite a number of months and had a fair amount of heartache over it and challenges and issues. And some of them I even expressed a little bit this morning, and many of you are probably aware of them. But, we are interested and want just feedback. Are we on track? Does this look good? Does it look like it's going to fill the general needs or your general understanding of what the functional model for the IDSG should be? So any feedback along those lines that, does this not meet the needs? This is a big problem. This is not looking like it's, on track, whether at a minimum, just to assuage our egos, that that we'd appreciate a little bit of that, so that we have some consensus that we are on track. And just to respond to a couple of those last comments, we approach it a little bit idealistically. That we understand that there's not necessarily one functional model, and that potentially conceive that whether it's reference designs or other things, represent the various functional model implementations that we need to cover. But we did attempt to try and, as broadly as possible, cover, the entirety of what's needed for simplicity, for idealistic, reasons to make it easy to use going forward. But we do recognize, Jack, that there's many various requirements. We're hoping that this is general enough to cover, if not all, a very large percentage of those needs. Hope that made sense. Yes, over here.
Hi, Tim McKay with Casa Permanente.
Hi, Tim.
I think this has been really good work, and I can see the layering and the stepping forward. And perhaps there's something that can come from the vertical groups that could help in model validation. So a danger in starting with premises and then working up to actors and then working up to use cases and then working up to user experience is that the end user experience may capture the needs of the model more than the needs of the user. And so there's, I think, at least a need to validate the model by starting with user experience in what the interactions are needed in the verticals, and then working backwards to see what are the flows, what are the use cases, do we have the actors captured appropriately, and do we have the elements of the model that are going to make it sustainable in the real world?
So my only feedback to you is, did somebody seed you to ask that question? Because we've been struggling with that, and had a lot of impetus to approach it more from the user perspective, and for lack of a better explanation, didn't quite know how or didn't have the expertise to do that.
Yeah, I think I come more from the product world, and that's been more kind of our general approach. And it seems that when models are worked both ways, you get something really, really solid.
Well, we would love your contribution, and if at all participation, to aid in that, because we need additional expertise to support that. And I'm going to be reaching out to you, Tim, and give you the weekly number and try and see if you can participate. It sounds like we have Sitharama wants to comment as well.
No, I just wanted to briefly say that I think that's a very good point made, but it's a challenge to execute on that, right? I mean, to start from the user experience and then going down into the type of interactions we need. It's a work that somebody needs to do it. It's like, what exactly is the user experience that we are trying to create here is a hard question to answer. I think we have been kind of trying to answer that question for a lot of years.
Thank you. So we'll take a couple more questions. I'm sorry? Is there anything online? Okay. Yes, we're wrapping up, but there is a comment or question online. Okay, so over here, and then over.
Thank you. It's Sal Khan from Assure 360. What you've proposed is a very traditional model, and there are alternatives. First of all, people have been identity proved to get real-world documents, and those identities and their attributes are stored within the certified registration authorities. So if you could validate the identity of the document and the individual in an identity proofing scenario, plus use the retroactively identity proofed identities of the individuals and tie that to a mobile device, you have an alternative model to work with.
Okay, so I think we're pretty familiar with that, but we just haven't been able to represent it. And we welcome your, input to help us make sure we cover that.
The model you're familiar with doesn't tie the individual to the attributes. It's key. It's like a biometric situation. You've got to tie the individual to the attributes, or it doesn't work. You have too many fake documents around. You've got to have the individual involved. I'll be happy to help out on that if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So online, do we want to go to
Yes.
the room? Go ahead, please.
Okay, so the question here is from Tom Jones. The functional requirements were proposed to the security group. Several people have suggested that requirements need to be stated. What is the status of functional requirements?
In process. We've had conversations, but we haven't really taken it on wholly. Your contribution there is very much in our work plan, Tom, and we appreciate that, and we have not lost it. We just haven't. We've got tied up with other business. And if you look at each of the last 3 or 4 meeting agendas, it's been on it, and it's still on it. So we will get there. Was there another one online, or?
No.
Okay, Steve, I think, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, Steve Bruck, User Experience Committee. So just 2 points. One, wholeheartedly welcome you to our 3:45 meeting downstairs. I think, by the way, during tomorrow's plenary, our draft charter will be submitted for your approval, and I hope that you do take the time to review it and that you vote for it tomorrow. Okay. My second comment is about how you might be able to take this and extend the value. I would try to link it up with this morning's conversation about value proposition. So, pointing to what Facebook just did with their adjustment of their policy so that you might not have your entire tree shared with somebody, that's a reaction to kind of a perceived requirement, right? And so if we could have in some way come out with essentially a gap identification, I think requirements are generally softer than something like a gap identification. That would be a way for us to demonstrate that thought leadership. Say, hey, you know what? We know how these things ought to work. We know the kinds of features that, even in terms of privacy, that end users would be desiring. And this would be a terrific end state. And wouldn't it be great if companies like Facebook were to implement things like this? And if we were to do that in a general way, maybe kind of, hindsight being 20/20, that would have been a really neat thing for us to do. Just thinking about it, maybe changing the terminology from requirements to gap analysis. And I look at the NSTIC document as a real gigantic gap analysis of where is the market today, what are the things that we do today online, and what do we need in the future.
I think that's a good point, and actually interesting relative to positioning versus Facebook, what they're trying to do. And I think it's worth considering. So we should take it up and figure out where and who, how that we might be able to do that. So I just want to take one more minute, and then we're wrapping up for this session. Is just to highlight where we're going, and I will admit that there is an oversight. There is a chunk of work related to functional requirements that we have on the agenda. It's just not properly reflected here. But we are working on finalizing components of the functional model. And we'll be creating teams to focus on completion of these deliverables and artifacts. And we very much welcome additional participants. At a minimum, anybody who has any interest, please join on the functional model listserv, and you'll be kept up to date. It's very active, but not too active, so it'll be easy to track, and you'll be able to stay involved and jump in, at points where you can contribute or have viewpoints that are maybe not being represented that we should cover. So I strongly encourage you to participate, and we definitely are looking for more contributors. We do meet weekly at the Security Committee meeting every Thursday afternoon, And, you know, we are working on finalizing the complete functional model to be able to present it at the next plenary in September. So that's you know, our current plan. And, you know, for better or for worse, I'm going to come out of this session saying, you know, everybody that's here felt we were generally on track. I welcome pushback if that's not the case, so please let us know. So I think with that, we'll wrap it up for this session. I appreciate everybody's, you know, time and participation, and, you know, don't be strangers. Please help us out. This is, you know, the first big deliverable and critical to a lot of other work, and we got to get it right. So, you know, anybody who has anything to offer, whether, even if it's just a little bit of time and energy, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. It's all yours.
Sorry, just trying to keep us on track as much as possible with this very full agenda. So next, we are going to spend until 3 o'clock getting some updates from the different committees. Some of you are active in 1 or 2 or even 3 committees, but this is a chance for you to get to hear from all of the committees. The request was made that we start by focusing on the 2 committees that are more industry type committees. So we have, a lot of them are more functional. So we have, like we just had this presentation from the Security Committee, but we also have a Financial Services and Healthcare committees. And then from that point on, we're going to continue going down the path alphabetically. So up first will be a brief conversation from the Financial Services Committee, followed by Healthcare, and then third on deck is International. Hi, Don. So do we have somebody that can give an update to Financial Services?
Okay, I'm Bob Panera. I'm the chair of the Financial Services Committee. Our committee actually did not meet today, so I don't have an actual report out on what we did today, but I was asked to just talk about what's going on in the committee in general. And the shorter answer is not a whole lot. Main reason because we don't really have any active participation from financial institutions. Initially, the committee was chartered to create or develop use cases, recommendations, requirements, policies, whatever it takes to actively engage the financial services industry in the identity ecosystem. And we started by having regular meetings. We even submitted, I believe, 2 use cases to the use case ad hoc group specific to financial services. But the problem is those use cases were really developed by the people who came to the table, which were mostly consultants and vendors. So some of the feedback that I've heard from you know, some of the financial services people who are on the mailing list, and there are even a few financial institutions who are members of IDESG, and they'll say, well, IDESG is a very bureaucratic organization. If we want to do something with identity, there are other financial specific organizations such as BITS and FS-ISAC that we can go to do something. IDESG is just a bunch of consultants and vendors and special interests looking to push their own agenda. So, you know, we don't really belong there. You know, that kind of a thing. So clearly financial services should be important to an identity ecosystem. I mentioned a little while ago some of the concerns that they had with this idea of federated identity, that, you know, it may not make sense to financial institutions for routine authentication. They may not want to have a credential that they issue to their customers being used by their customer to go someplace else, go to a competitor to authenticate. You know, maybe a place where it might be more useful is in enrollment. That is, if somebody goes to a financial website and wants to open a new account, that financial institution needs to verify their identity, and today they might do some kind of knowledge-based authentication or some other kind of identity proofing, but it seems like intuitively it would be nice if they could, if that relying party financial institution could rely on a credential issued by another bank that they trusted just to do the initial identity proofing and enrollment. But even that itself is something that the FIs would have to take back, and they'd have to look in, they have a whole bunch of questions like, would the regulators, because financial services is highly regulated, would the regulators go along with this for our know your customer rules that we have to verify, that we have to conform to? Would a trusted federated credential, be okay with the regulators? What about liability? Is there a business case for us to do that? There's a whole bunch of questions that they would have, but I think we need to really get them to the table, first of all, to scope out some set of, what's the value proposition for financial services to be involved with the identity ecosystem? What are those things that it could do? Then I think they would have to go away and crank through some of this analysis to try to figure out what kind of really makes sense to them, and then have them come back and say, okay, we've decided that we want the identity ecosystem to support this, this, and that. So that's when we would get into some real use cases that would really have the backing of the FIs and not just us consultants and vendors, cooking this stuff up on our own. So I think that's what we need. So the question is, how do we get the FIs to the table? And, one possibility is because it's a heavily regulated industry, there are federal regulators. The one in particular is called the FFIEC, the Federal Financial Institutions Examination Council, and they issued a guidance to the banks a couple of years ago, basically telling the banks, you better do something better than just passwords when you're authenticating people for online banking. And they didn't tell them what they had to do. They kind of made it kind of fuzzy. So that's why now you see when you do online banking, they want you to pick challenge questions. They want you to pick a secret picture that's going to pop up when you try to log in, or maybe they'll even send you a one-time code to your mobile phone. So that organization, that federal FFIEC, seems to have a certain amount of sway over the financial institutions. I wonder could we somehow get them involved with IDESG? Could the NPO approach the FFIEC and say, hey, maybe this identity ecosystem stuff we're working on can help the banks do stronger, better authentication, and that might pique the interest. But I think that's our main problem, is really how to engage the relying party banks in this effort. So,
thank you.
That's it.
So the activities that we did from value proposition earlier today, the conversation that Peter had around the strategic planning update. All of those will be to help the different committees, so thank you for that update. Next up is healthcare.
Again, Tom Sullivan, healthcare. We have an almost identical situation to what Bob just described. We don't have any big healthcare industries being represented on our committee. Most of our volunteers are either independent consultants or work for vendors, so we have a similar situation. But I truly believe that one of the reasons we still are active is because the NPO and Jeremy and some others were able to get a liaison, an official liaison from the Office of the National Coordinator, and they are one of our heavy regulators in healthcare now. I reiterate what I said yesterday. If we got somebody from Medicare and Medicaid to be active, I think we'd have some big healthcare industries deciding that they needed to join our committee and see what IDESG has to offer. So I make that plea again. I will say the people who are on the committee are very knowledgeable. We are very fortunate to have some real experts, subject matter experts in healthcare, and one of them. We have this slide up in front of us. I've mentioned Bill Braithwaite before, but he's the father of the HIPAA privacy rule when he was working for the federal government for many years. And he's a consultant now and chair of the HIMSS task force on identity management, when we share quite a bit of work together. So this is our latest proposal that we've been discussing in our committee over the last several meetings. And it's a little bit controversial, but we're basically saying that patients should be authenticated at LOA 3, and the caveat is unless there's a HIPAA risk analysis that justifies another reasonable, appropriate safeguard. And there's a lot that goes along with this, but this was our short version of a policy statement, and we could justify, why we said this. Now, another proposal is, well, this makes it too complicated. What about the 80 and 90-year-old? What about the, what the heck is LOA 3? I mean, we've discussed all of this before. So we're just throwing this out there as one of the things that we are discussing right now, and the implications of this. And if anybody would like to help us come to a consensus on this, we'd be happy to have you join our committee. But the other thing is, I chuckle a little bit. We're financial industry and healthcare. We're both highly regulated. I would debate that we are more highly regulated than finance, but that's part of a debate. Anyway, thank you. That's my brief report out.
Thank you. And one of the things that, tomorrow we're going to have more of a healthcare discussion. We hope to be able to do that with a number of committees. The next committee that's going to, present is international coordination. And initially we were going to have a speaker that was recommended by that committee that has been postponed to a future plenary. But having even representatives come from or come to support or show the importance of those committees is maybe a way that we can also get more recruitment. So hopefully tomorrow, once we start that dialogue with people from the healthcare community, that can maybe keep things moving. Thank you. Don.
So Kim, I can give you three choices. I can do 5 minutes from here, we can use the slides, or we can do a video.
Whatever you like. And in terms of location, I thought it was interesting that people started lining up there to have them. You can come up here. This is all yours, whatever you think is best. Or let me turn to the AV people. The clicker is here. But you're welcome to come up here. Yeah, come on up. I don't need to be here.
No. You can be the eye candy.
That's some bad candy.
Hi, I put together these slides because there's been a lot of activity of late, and I wanted to make sure we shared it with you. And the clicker. So, bridging the N to the C and NSTIC is part of what we're doing. So, the International Committee's job is really to build this bridge. We're lucky that many of our members are non-U.S. citizens, so they bring an important perspective to it. And we're looking specifically for global engagement. Think of the committee as a two-way bridge. Our job is to bring the perspectives of those of you in the room and the NSTIC to a larger audience. And so we have, for the last year or so, been surveying. In the last week, we've been presenting to our international colleagues. And we want to make sure, as Kim indicated, that we're bringing the perspectives on identity from other jurisdictions to your attention. So, as I mentioned, our job, as we see it in the International Committee, is to faithfully represent the IDSG and the work of the NPO to outside constituencies. And the inbound messaging is to bring perspectives of international colleagues back to us. And truth be told, one cannot faithfully represent those constituencies outside of the U.S. without talking about their perspectives, which are largely influenced by matters beyond our control. As Kim indicated, we want to make sure that we're bringing perspectives from the EU, the UK, and other folks here. So we hope that in future plenaries we'll be informed by international identity leaders from the EU and get a briefing on what their perspectives are on identity. We also been taking the message out. Last week, a number of us were at the EMA conference. Jeremy sat on a panel with his colleagues from the public and private sector and shared an update on NSTIC in London a week ago yesterday. And we also have been using other venues, other opportunities, in this case a conference aimed at the financial services industry in particular, and the hope that how other groups like this one have been challenged by pulling the bankers and the retail folks into the game is a shared experience, and we wanted to make sure that you all had a sense of lessons learned from those venues. So we do things differently in that we have this inbound and outbound role that we've talked about. We do have a prejudice, and our prejudice is to look for examples of identity initiatives in countries that share a common culture and a common legal framework. We think that's the most sensible way of getting this conversation, this two-way conversation started. As I mentioned, in the past we've created an inventory of NSTIC-like activities that informs the work that we're doing. We want to make sure that we continue to bring value-added summaries and indexed information to you for the work in your committees. So we've had a number of products or projects in flight that I'll tell you more about. One of the things that we did last week was to have an opportunity for Mike Garcia to sit on a panel with other colleagues that were speaking to what we call the economics of identity. What are the new business models and what are the value drivers when it comes to identity in existing systems? I thought I'd share with you kind of a perspective of the International Committee's interest through the prism of the NSTIC goals. So if you think about interoperability, I think some of the most important work that's happening just adjacent to or outside of our efforts are work being done in other organizations, one of which is the OpenID Foundation. The 4 mobile network operators and other relying parties and service providers are just about to announce a new profile of OpenID Connect, which we've been calling Mobile Connect. What's very important about this is that, as we all know, so much of what we're doing here is built on a foundation of open standards. OpenID Connect, which was launched in February, is now beginning to get traction not only from adoption of the major industry players and identity providers worldwide, but importantly on the platform of choice, which is the mobile platform. So we think that there's some exciting work ahead of providing an open identity standard that will be optimized for the mobile computing experience. The fact that the 4 mobile network operators and others are working together in the OpenID Foundation standards effort, I think is significant and important. The other thing that we're beginning to spin up is a collaboration between the OpenID Foundation and the MIT KIT perspective. We think that this can be an envelope for some of the work done by our colleagues in the IDSG Health Committee. Our job from an international committee is to make sure that we're in touch with standards in different jurisdictions and bringing them to the benefit so that people like Adrian and others, institutions like MIT, standards development organizations like the OpenID Foundation can begin to develop a profile in the healthcare space, much in the same way that a profile is being developed in the mobile computing space based on an open standard. This is just the beginning of these efforts, but again, our job is to let you and others know that we think that these are important things to watch. One of the things that's happening with our colleagues in the UK Identity Assurance Program is that they've seen important open source approach to digital signatures. So we'll soon be hearing from companies like Adobe and others, interestingly, how digital signatures in the UK, US, and EU can begin to become part of the fabric of this internet identity ecosystem. Some very powerful work is being done in Israel, both on trust marks and on digital signatures, that we want to bring to your attention, either through speakers, through workshops, or white papers. I think one of the coolest thing and one of the most powerful ways of releasing the value in identity, the ecosystem, is to begin to think about a standardized way, an open standard for elevating trust. It's a problem that many jurisdictions, whether you're in Canada, in the US, or the UK, is how do you get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3? And then how do you get down again in an open and standardized way? If we, this effort, can collaborate with similar efforts in the UK on a joint way, an open way, to elevate trust, we significantly impact the ecosystem. How is that to occur? If you think about the hub that the UK IDAP program is using, the F6 program in the US, the concierge program in Canada, if they were to agree on an open standard for how to move from one level of assurance to another, we would begin to be able to populate the identity system more broadly with both commercial, government, and other adoption for elevating trust. If we all have a standard that we can reference, we do an incredible benefit to the commercial and government sector in this space. One of the things occurring in the identity assurance program in the UK is a specific call out for a trust mark in the identity assurance program. What's a trust mark? How is it different from a logo? How is it different from a brand? How is it different from a fave? What we've begun to do is to, just in the way that we've published a paper on the vocabulary of liability, we want to have a paper on the vocabulary of trust marks. Very modest contribution, but very important one. Can we at least use the same words to mean the same thing when we're talking about liability or trust marks? In that case, it's not a purely academic paper, but it looks to the UK identity assurance model as a test case, a use case for trust marks. Lastly, as I mentioned, we have the Mobile Connect effort, and there's an important kind of connective tissue, if you will. One key pivot point in identity assurance is where identity assurance meets the consumer, the patient, the citizen. How is it that that consent and permissioning occurs? How might it occur in a mobile use case, a health use case, and how might this consent and permissioning become an open and standardized way? We're a long way from that, but in the case of the UK, in the case of the mobile work that we're doing in the US and that is occurring in Canada, we have for the first time competitors collaborating. The mobile network operators in the US and in the UK and in Canada have begun to realize that by working together, they expand the marketplace, and that the marketplace is only expanded by working together and building standards and systems that they all agree upon. So if we can agree upon this one piece as a starting point, how consent and permissioned might be standardized in an open way, I think we unlock value in those marketplaces. I should say that I deliberately put that consent and permissioning piece in the privacy enhancing, because I think that one of the most powerful things we can do across jurisdictions is to have an open standard, so that if we all have a common approach to consent and permissioning, we have for the first time an opportunity to read across about how privacy is parsed in each of those sectors, in each of those jurisdictions. And I think that provides a practical and pragmatic way to begin to assess the role of the individual in these systems in a privacy-enhancing way. Lastly, on secure, some of the work that's being done in the UK on what's called a shared signals model. This is early work. It begins with a white paper that's publicly available. It moves to a pilot and workshops where we begin to ask IDPs to do a very simple thing, which is to share a signal that may indicate some problem with some email accounts. This is not engaging identity or PII, but it begins to say and create an open collaboration structure so that as an email provider sees a new account that was opened yesterday that's beginning to send 50,000 emails a minute, that there might be something wrong with that account that would have an impact on a relying party or another identity provider. So these simple, pragmatic, low cost, low friction pilots and experiments and white papers, I think, are important ways that we can collaborate across jurisdictions. And interoperability, we've talked about the work that's being done in liability and digital signatures and trust marks. And we have a number of projects in the pipeline that I talked about. The International Committee wants to be able to keep producing and informing kind of silver buckshot, if you will. No silver bullets, but ways of informing other IDSG committees about what's happening elsewhere and how that might inform their work. I talked about the trust mark issue. Here's an example of the kind of work that we want to look at is how might a trust mark in a given jurisdiction like the US impact existing commercial providers and elsewhere. If you'll beg my indulgence, we could do that video or not.
No.
I have a wild hypothesis that, like the cloud, there is tremendous economic value waiting to be unlocked in this identity stuff.
There's a massive opportunity here.
Now's the time where we have to really work together to collaborate to develop the open standards that are going to make this thing work.
I think identity assurance, federated identity is definitely the future.
People want to be able to interact with government in the same way they do the rest of their lives, to do it quickly, conveniently online.
There's greater economic value to all parties from truly putting the user in the middle of this stuff.
There's lots of innovation that we're going to witness.
Federation is not just about security, not just about enabling the market. It's also about a multi-prestige solution, helping put the user back in control of their data.
The way the standards operate is that you have to get this range of evidence across citizen, money and living. Taken together, they give you a defined level of confidence, and that's the way that the model works.
Owning identity is a very important source of power, and our view is the citizen should own his or her identity, not the government.
The question everyone wants to ask is, are you you? Can I trust that you are you enough to make an important decision?
If you want to have a lot more services being provided online, then identity assurance is absolutely essential.
In 5 years, are you going to be participating in the gov.uk identity provision?
I think it makes sense. For sure. Yes, if our customers want it.
We're all agreed that identity assurance is very big and very important. The total current cost of assuring identity works out at around £3.3 billion.
It lowers costs for a lot of businesses to be able to outsource identity to a federated model.
So OIX seeks to be this place where we can begin to build the kind of infrastructure and rules and tools and the open standards that we'll need to really build this economic and policy opportunity that we've talked about. So I encourage you to join. Thanks all. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Don. So this kind of gives you a flavor of a lot of the things that are going on with the International Committee, and it was a number of great events that happened in London last week. So we are going to be pressed for time to be able to make it through all the committee readouts, but I think it's important for you all to get to have a chance to have a good debrief from each committee, so we'll adjust the schedule to accommodate. The next committee would be the Policy Coordination Committee, but I am not sure if there's anybody that's representing that committee today. Just to make sure, oh. No. Okay, this one. So the next one is the Privacy Committee. If we could have an update from Privacy. And you're welcome to come up here, Stuart.
Well, I'm not going to embarrass you? Okay. I don't have slides, so I never have slides. All right, so I'm Stuart Shapiro. I'm the current chair of the Privacy Committee. So very quickly, what has the Privacy Committee been up to? In addition to our standing subcommittees, which are the Privacy Evaluation Methodology Development Subcommittee, or PEMDEV, and the Evaluation Subcommittee, whose purpose is fairly self-evident, I would think. We also have two temporary working groups going right now. One is a charter refresh working group. having been in operation for a couple of years now, we have discovered, not surprisingly, some gaps and ambiguities in our committee charter. And so we are working to resolve those issues and make some enhancements, and that working group is cranking away on that. We also have a privacy requirements working group beavering away, and that is, I think, for the purposes of the rest of you, probably of far more importance and interest. That group along, and I should say this is also true of the Security Committee, the Standards Committee, and the User Experience Committee, is working on generating requirements for use by the Trust Framework and Trustmark Committee in developing their trust framework and accreditation, certification standards, conformance criteria, what have you. But the idea is that at least as far as the Privacy Committee is concerned, the idea is that these requirements would also hopefully be of use to other committees as they see fit as they're developing various other work products. So the Privacy Committee's Privacy Requirements Working Group is working away on as you expect a working group to be doing, working away on developing these privacy requirements. I'm not quite sure when or what point we're going to have a complete draft of these things ready to go, but you can rest assured that it won't be next week. As far as other Privacy Committee activities, we recently ratified version 1.6 of the Privacy Evaluation Methodology. You may recall that the previous version was version 1.5, so you can infer that there were not any dramatic changes to the PEM. However, there was one, I think, somewhat important change that I want to highlight, and that is there is now a distribution list called Privacy Leadership, no space, just one word, Privacy Leadership at idecosystem.org. And that list distributes to the Privacy Committee officers, the chairs of the standing subcommittees, and the leaders of the working groups. And the principal motivation for establishing that list was to provide a ready mechanism, and hopefully a more effective mechanism, through which committees submitting work products for privacy review and evaluation can get them in and make sure that multiple sets of eyes will actually see them and then forward those deliverables to the larger Privacy Committee list. The problem with the Privacy Committee list is that you have to be a subscriber to the Privacy Committee list in order to post to it. The Secretariat was able to configure the Privacy Leadership list so that anybody can post to it. Even though it only goes to that small subset of people, anybody within IDSG can post to it. And so when work products are ready for submission, we are asking that they be sent to Privacy Leadership at idecosystem.org so that there's a much smaller chance that because, various people are distracted or on vacation or what have you, there's a much lower chance that nobody will notice that a work product has actually been submitted for evaluation, which I think is in everyone's interest. So I just wanted to call out that particular part of PEM 1.6, version 1.6, which is now up on the Privacy Committee page. That's where the gold copy of the PEM always sits. It's on our Privacy Committee page, and if anyone wants to download it, then that's where you should go to download the current gold copy. Speaking of evaluation, the Standards Committee has submitted the current set of use cases to the Privacy Committee for privacy evaluation, and we have started on that process. And finally, we've kind of rebooted our liaisons. The Privacy Committee strives to have liaisons from the Privacy Committee to every active committee and in some cases active working group, and depending on the balance of activity. And we now have a kind of rebooted, reset roster of liaisons to the various active committees and working groups where we thought that made sense. And so if you haven't, if you haven't heard from them, particularly if you're a committee officer and you haven't heard from them, you can expect to be hearing from them or to, for them to be making themselves known to you and or your larger committee in fairly short order. And they're, just to remind everybody, they're kind of the channel, the communications channel back to the Privacy Committee. Not that we object to anybody from any other committee getting in touch with any of us as the mood strikes, but those are kind of the official communications channels, and we certainly urge you to avail yourself of them. They're going to try to keep the Privacy Committee apprised of what's going on with the various other committees. They're also there as a resource to provide comment and expertise to the extent that they feel that they have appropriate background to make recommendations to a committee as they're developing work products. And if they don't feel that they're in a position to authoritatively make recommendations to a committee, then they will take that issue or bring that issue back to the Privacy Committee and consult with the larger Privacy Committee and get back to the committee regarding that. So bottom line, they are the official channel back to the Privacy Committee. They are a resource for the committee they're liaising with to take advantage of, in a good way, not a bad way. And we urge the other committees to do that. And that's it, I think.
Thank you, Stuart. Next is security. So you've talked about the functional model. Now there's many more things that we can give an update on.
I promise I'll be short. I just needed a few more minutes on the stage because I felt like I didn't get enough before. I just want to give a very brief update, and I'll work to get us back on track. The Security Committee, as we mentioned, is very focused and almost 100% focused on, over the past many months, on the functional model work. And that is a large portion of every meeting. The functional model work is done in the primary Security Committee, and we're still evaluating the need and considering the need for creating an ad hoc group to focus on the functional model so that Security Committee can do other work and we could overall be more productive. So that is something that is being considered again and maybe has increased interest in happening. So in addition to that, there were two other subcommittees that we chartered under the Security Committee, one of which is on hiatus. Just remind everybody about it. And then one of which is soon to be on hiatus, most likely. There's the taxonomy ad hoc group, which hasn't met in almost a quarter. It's still out there. There's still potentially work to do. We put it on hold, and there's been no progress on that and no determination on picking it up. We are looking for somebody to lead that ad hoc group and take it over, but there hasn't been, there is additional work to do, but it hasn't been of a very urgent nature. The other ad hoc group is the attribute ad hoc group. And as I think many of you know, we have a roundtable tomorrow afternoon. I encourage everybody to attend. I do think it'll be very enlightening and interesting. We have a bunch of presentations and should be very interesting. As I recall, I was not intimately involved in it, but as I recall, there are several things going on that will be discussed tomorrow. There are a number of initiatives across different organizations, I think mostly in the federal government, around attributes and bringing a bunch of them together and discussing some common activities, common work efforts, and how to better collaborate, and also to potentially set the stage for a NIST-led workshop on attribute management potentially this summer. So I encourage everybody to do that. But at the same time, so that is happening, and that should be informative. I encourage everybody to join. But at the same time, the Attribute Hack Group has been suffering from lack of participation and a little bit lack of direction. And so we've been trying to work through that. And just last week, barring anything else, we've made the determination that we want a broader participation. We feel the attribute practice statement and other deliverables are applicable across the IDSG, and so we are making an outreach to get other committees involved and even take over some level of sponsorship of that. And so we are going to affect that in the short order, but barring any immediate committees stepping up and pushing that, the committee is recommending that we put the attribute ad hoc group on hold until there is energy and time to move that forward. I still am a supporter and feel it's a worthwhile activity. The only other thing to announce, which was announced recently in the all chairs call, is we stubbed ourselves on the foot a little bit. We are responsible for holding committee leadership elections, and as we got into it, realized we were not following the proper election notification requirements or policy in the rules of association, and so there's been some communications about that. So we initiated an election, and then we had to pull it back, and we have restarted it. And so there will be an election approximately at the end of July, and this is part of my effort to call for nominees. I will be releasing a schedule next week and official request for nominees. We have some interested participants for the chairman and vice chairman roles. We have one vice chairman, myself, and one other candidate for chairman, but we are looking for other potential nominees. So I would put a call out if anybody is interested in helping the important work of the Security Committee. So there are some learnings there that are now around the election and notifications that are rolling downhill to other committees who are going to be recommended to follow. And the final thing I'll just share is that as a result, we are about to undertake updating our charter to ease those notification requirements, because bottom line is, in the rules, the IDSG Rules Association requires 45 days notice, and for committee activities, we have believe that that's too cumbersome or onerous, too long. So we are going to start the charter amendment process to shorten that and to more specifically delineate the election requirements. And we are going to make sure that we make them common, support the common across all committees, and support whatever work is needed to make that happen. So that's the update I have, and again, we welcome participation in our committee. We have a strong group, strong committed group, but we can always use more help. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. The comment about being able to learn from other committees is really important. And so we do have every other week an all chairs call where the chairs can share what their concerns are, what the good things are, where there might be some interdependencies on deliverables and other things. And that is one of the vehicles where that conversation about the security committee's voting process helped, because other committees are having to go through elections very soon as well. So shared learnings are really important. Up next is our standards committee. So as Kathy comes to the stage, trying to accommodate the auditorium style sometimes is a little bit challenging, so we apologize.
It's probably only a problem if you have short little legs and it takes you a while to get from one place to another. So I just want to fill you in a little bit about what's going on in the Standards Committee, or the SCC as we like to call it, Standards Coordination Committee. First item I'd like to mention is our work in the use cases. We have a use case ad hoc group that is led by Brian Russell. And right now we have version 1.2 of the IDESG use cases deliverable, which is in formal privacy committee review at this point. You may recall that we had originally submitted version 1 back in the January timeframe into the formal approval process. We did get comments from the Management Council, preliminary comments. We did address those. It took us quite a while to get through all those comments and dispose of them. We revised the document, and that's the document that's been resubmitted into the first step of the approval process, which is the Privacy Committee review. I will mention that the biggest comment or complaint, I guess I should say, on the document is that it does not cover all relevant use cases for the identity ecosystem. And so we're aware of that. It's very difficult to know when you have covered all the relevant use cases. But we do plan to expand the use cases in the version 2.0. So rather than hold this up until we think we have covered the waterfront, we feel it's very important to get the initial set of use cases out there so that they can be actively used by the various committees in the development of their own work products, for example, as a test case to bounce their work products against. So as we do move forward with the next version, we are hoping that we will get substantial inputs from the plenary and stakeholders and committees, all of you, because if there is a missing use case, the group isn't going out and making these things up. We are getting them from you. There's a way to submit use cases very easily on the use case wiki. So we hope you'll avail yourself of that. And the next time you find a use case that you say, oh, this document's incomplete because it doesn't cover use case XYZ, we would absolutely love you to write up use case XYZ and submit it. The other thing the use case ad hoc group is doing is they're going back and looking. We chartered the ad hoc group without actually having a written terms of reference for them. And so the question comes up, what are we supposed to be doing? So we've been working on formalizing the terms of reference for that group so that it's very clear what their mission is and what their purpose and what they're supposed to be doing. Adam already mentioned the taxonomy thing, so I won't go into that. That's a joint ad hoc group between the standards and security committees. The other thing we've done recently is that we have stood up the standards inventory on the standards wiki. So what, you may ask, is a standards inventory? Well, it's basically a repository of all known identity-related standards. It's on the wiki, and what does that mean? It means that anyone with an IDESG logon can enter a standard into that repository, and this is an uncritical listing. It does not imply adoption by the IDESG or endorsement of any kind. It's just a place where we're gathering all of the information, the metadata about the existing identity-related standards, and this is meant to be used as a resource and as a reference. So if you have an opportunity, go out and look at that, and if there's an identity-related standard that you're aware of that isn't included on there, it's very easy for you to add that into the listing. The next thing, and probably the thing we've been spending the most time on recently, is the standards adoption policy. And so I'm not going to go into detail about that because we have a session on it tomorrow at 10:30. So I would just encourage you to come and hear about what we've done in that area and what the status is and where we're going with it. And lastly, I just want to mention that the Standards Committee has received from the pilots, the NSTIC pilots, a proposal for a standards project related to KBA performance metrics. And so that right now is in review by the committee. It's on the agenda for our 26th of June meeting to discuss that. And it's really the first example of gap identification, standards gap identification that has been brought forward to us and that will exercise our standards adoption policy, how we go about identifying and filling gaps and how we go about selecting SDOs, how we go about working with them, and just, you know, the gamut there. So we're looking forward to that discussion next week. And I think that's it, unless anybody has questions. Thank you.
Up next is Trust Framework.
Hi, I'm David Temashak from the MPO and leading a work activity within the TFTM committee, into which I'm going to report on for this plenary. Oops. We have a number of work streams within the TFTM committee, all directed for 01, which is really the initial year of work streams, which is this year. 0106, you can see the 0106 goal, develop and establish an initial IDESG conformance and trustmark program for 2014. I want to make the distinction between the conformance program and the trustmark program. Any trustmark program has sets of requirements for determined conformance or compliance. We're using the term conformance. This initial task or the initial objective was for 2014 to look at different industry models, determine the most appropriate model for the IDESG to pursue for 2014 conformance program, and then address the trustmark question subsequently. 3 different industry models were used and analyzed and evaluated for this particular work objective. A self-assertion model, a self-attestation and self-assessment model, and a third-party assessment and certification. I'd just like to make the distinction on self-assertion, what that means. This really are models where conformance requirements are established, but the applicant or the self-assessor doesn't actually perform an assessment that can be publicly available based on the best beliefs, best knowledge of the self-assessor. The self-assessor determines conformance. Self-assessment and attestation actually responds to an assessment process and attests to the conformance to the requirements within that from a self-assessment standpoint. That's the distinction between those models. In the analysis and evaluation, we looked at 4 primary factors across those 3 different conformance program models. The resource burden, principally on the administering entity, the implementation time, both for the administering entity, which would be the IDSG in this case, of course, and those that would be applying or applying for the assessment process, the implementation time to get the program ready and also performs the assessments. Costs. We wanted to look at cost, but understandably it's very difficult to isolate or determine costs for any of these programs on either the administering entities or those that would be involved. So we made estimates on that. And assurance, what the different models, the level of assurance that would be provided of conformance for each of those three approaches. And we analyzed, in the evaluation, we analyzed each of those factors on a three-factor approach: high, moderate, or low. And of course, this was not intended to be a rigorous examination, but really a high-level analysis of those existing industry models. And for the industry models that we looked at, these are the examples for self-assessment and attestation, as well as third-party assessment and certification programs that we looked at across those four factors. There are multiple industry models. We tried to look at those that dealt primarily with identity management and security. And it's interesting to see also that a number of these programs have both self-assessment models within their programs as well as third-party assessments. As an overview of that analysis and evaluation across those four factors and the assessment models. By the way, for third-party assessment, we looked at three different cases of those: peer review, third-party independent assessors or third-party independent auditors, and a certification authority that does both the assessment process and certifies based on their own assessment. In this case, it would be IDSG acting as that certification authority. And in going in, we have to go on some assumptions that the implementation time becomes important. If it's going to be an extended implementation time to put these programs into place, it's not going to be a 2014 program. Also, for cost, given the cost constraints that we have, cost becomes an important assumption on what can be a viable approach for the IDESG for 2014. So you see highlighted the self-assessment and attestation models, and there are variations, of course, within this model that are in place in industry today that seems to fit best for what we would need to do for 2014 as both viable and also bringing value to the IDESG and potential users of the IDESG services. So the TFTM committee is making the recommendation that we go forward with building a self-assessment and self-attestation approach for IDESG for 2014. But in doing that, also target in the, we have various work streams, in the O2, which is 2015 and beyond work streams, looking at third-party assessments, third-party certification programs, and how that might also be applied within the IDESG structure. For next steps, we've been discussing building the conformance requirements. Building the conformance requirements for the conformance program for 2014. This is be the first set across committee input to the TFTM. Within the work streams, those requirements are assembled into a requirements catalog. It's one of the work items in work stream 01. It's 0104. In building this program, it's going to be necessary to build I'll call them the process rules. How does the IDESG, the TFTM committee, as well as those that would want to be involved in the self-assessment program, what are the rules on how this program would be administered? That's necessary for 2014. You see on check number 4, build the self-assessment and attestation conformance program assessment criteria, and I put questionnaire. In industry, we see both examples, or both in industry models, where there's clearly established criteria, And I'll just say, for a broad-based requirement is one thing. To be able to assess definitively based on a criterion that's expressed as, that can be expressed as, well, positively or negatively, becomes very important. That's what's attested to in a self-assessment and self-attestation model. We also see questionnaires that do the same thing, that verbalize it in the same way. And next steps within this work activity will be analyzing and evaluating similarly trustmark programs, which is the other hand on this, that after conformance is determined, either through self-assessment or through third-party assessment processes, and how that conformance is publicly recognized through trust marks. We've seen visible trust marks, distributed trust marks, electronic trust marks, and trust lists. Other means to be able to convey that public trust and conformance to those requirements. We'll be doing a similar analysis for those trust mark programs to have recommendation for the 2014 program for the IDESG as well. And obviously this becomes very important with the committee work, because the committee work in building the conformance program requirements is what comes into the TFTM, representing the needs and the requirements for the IDESG identity ecosystem for each of those domain specialty areas.
So our last committee actually is user experience, and I am not sure. Oh, thank you, Steve. And Steve will give that update.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Bruck. I'm the secretary of the User Experience Committee. I'm here to give you the report. Mary Hodder is out in California. She couldn't be here, but she's doing a great job as our chair. The other committees that you've heard from this afternoon all have formally approved charters. They've been in operation for quite some time. The User Experience Committee, on the other hand, never really fully got off the ground, and so we're in a situation where tomorrow you will have an opportunity to review our charter, and I hope that you do vote to approve it. We really began this restart back in February when the Management Council took the action to form a special subcommittee, and as a result of that, a number of people did express interest in joining this forming committee, and over that period of time we've developed a draft charter. And we've even begun to do some work. So the work that we've been doing, we've put together, as Kathy mentioned, similar to the inventory for standards, we have a repository on our own wiki of usability standards, guidelines, best practices. We're interested in your feedback regarding those things, and we think that they will be useful. The other work activity that we've been pursuing is responding to the NIST-derived requirements from the NSTIC guiding principles, and there are 5 particular areas which are geared toward usability and user experience, and our committee has responded to that request with some ideas as to how usability would pertain to those. I think a common theme among that response is a need for a consistent lexicon, a common way of describing exactly what is happening within this identity ecosystem so that a user has a common understanding across potentially all implementations. We've also been working with the Standards Committee to review the use cases. We do have a meeting this afternoon at 3:45, so if you agree, that the ultimate test of the success of any ecosystem or framework or any particular implementation is adoption. And I think you would also agree that user experience is the critical factor in that adoption. So, a lot of the conversations that we have here, a lot of different aspects, dimensions, perspectives, but many of them really do come back to user experience. We have a fairly small group of people who are currently participating in our committee. We encourage you to find the time to join us this afternoon at 3:45, if that really is still the time that we're going to meet. And then after that, to continue to join us and support the work that we're doing. Thanks.
So that summarizes all of our committee report outs. So we are a little bit off schedule, but we've made some adjustments. So let me just tell you what we're going to do. The next thing that we have on the agenda is the Identity Ecosystem Framework update. Andrew is still going to be able to take care of that, but he has said he can do it in 10 minutes.
Because I'm a fast talker, as you all
know. So the plan is that we are going to break about 5 minutes late, and then that'll allow us to get close to being on schedule with the breakout sessions. And then just as a reminder, there are there are 3 breakout sessions that are scheduled. The security privacy, the standards trust framework is in room E because they wanted to have a more interactive location, and the user experience is in room F. So they're both downstairs. Did I get that correct?
And you have one more. User experience is in 111. There's 3 today.
There's standards trust framework and user experience.
I'm sorry, I had the wrong one. You have in 111 health and privacy.
Thank you. And health and privacy is in room 111. So once again, standards trust framework, room E, user experience in room F, and health and privacy in room B111.
Do you have my slides for this one? Okay, so as we're getting the slides, I will try to talk fast. Should be about 10 minutes here. So the slide deck will be posted on the website. It has lots of words in it, so it stands on its own for a while. Please ask any questions by email through the committees, and we'll address any concerns or questions you have. What I'm going to be talking about is the status update of the Identity Ecosystem Framework Plan that we first heard about in Mountain View at Symantec in April. I just realized what a ecosystem framework is relative to an ecosystem. It's the egg carton. The ecosystem's the egg, right? So it's built to a standard. It's, thank you. It protects the ecosystem. It allows it to exist. So I'm going to skip every other slide. So what are the real questions about the ecosystem and ecosystem framework that we're asking ourselves? We heard this during the value proposition exercises and presentations. We hear this in the committees. We hear this at the all chairs call, management council. Really these 3 questions. What are we trying to do here? How are we going to get there? And where are we? Are we getting there fast enough or too fast? So just a quick rundown. This is my version of the high-level goals. Why are we here? This is the stated mission of the IDSG Inc., right, as developed over the last 6 months, year. We're giving individuals and organizations confidence in their online interactions. So what are the things that IDSG Inc. should be and will be producing? One thing that was echoed in many of the statements that we heard in the interactive session was some form of certification program, trust mark program, a way to set standards, acknowledge that they're being followed, and see them out in the marketplace. The other thing is, of course, a trusted brand, because it's no good having a certification program if no one trusts it and no one sees a value in it. So, how are we going to achieve those things? So, as we saw in the plan, in the ecosystem framework plan from April, one of the things is to create this the framework, right? And really, the framework will help shape the ecosystem that we want to see. It will set the rules, supply some of the tools, as other speakers have mentioned. It will describe how to conform with the national strategy and and achieve the guiding principles. IDSG will have to execute the program processes to certify the organizations that want to be differentiated in the marketplace, right? Basically run the trust mark program. And create market awareness. So market, lobby, and promote the benefits of these differentiators that go through the program and are issued by a trusted organization, being us, to the mass market. So the consumers, the citizens, the companies that provide services to them, the governments, the international players, they have to know about our trustworthy brand, how our program works, and why it creates beneficial differentiators in the market. So, what are we going to do in 2014? Which was the original question, I think, that was placed to me. This is just a refinement of the previous framework plan. So, first thing is to define a pragmatic, small scope, initial ecosystem framework. Right? As we heard in the previous presentation, get those initial processes. Get the initial processes defined and operational so that we can assess or recommend all the things that ecosystem participants should be doing or could be doing or express to us that they want to do in the eventual ecosystem. Also in 2014, finalize market strategies. So as we get closer to having the programs, the products, the recommendations, we do have to decide who we're marketing these to, who will consume them. That's part of the discussion around value proposition, is to try to tease apart what kinds of segments in the market we're addressing. Now, beyond 2014, of course, we will start certifying participants. Now, the exact mechanism and process that will be used to do that will develop in 2014, but we have to start actually exercising the program and processes in 2015 and beyond. And of course, the ecosystem framework is not set in stone. The 2014 version will be the initial version, sufficient to get us going, to recognize and differentiate organizations in the market. So the work for IDSG is to expand, evolve, enhance the framework as we go forward. Okay. So this part you can read online later. Oh, except for this one. Got a bit of time. So I was thinking about how to express, again, this idea of ecosystem framework and how it's different from the ecosystem itself. So if the framework shapes up the ecosystem of online interactors, people out there in the world, what do we need them to do in adhering to the guiding principles? Well, first of all, adhere to the guiding principles. So over time, as they follow the framework, as they use it, as they exercise the programs, follow the guidance, that sort of thing, you know, these 4 bullets express how they will evolve in time. And really that 4th bullet is the key. Benefit from the natural and explicit standardization and shared understanding that's inherent in following a common framework. That's where we get our interoperability from. That's where we get the commonality from. Okay. Adam, are you about to ask me a question?
I think it might be best when you're mostly wrapped.
Okay. So, more stuff you can read online. These... Okay. So, from the April version of the framework plan, we had 5 deliverables, being the functional model, requirements, risk assessment framework, compliance and conformance program, and the additional framework tools. We have been making progress since the last plenary, and the committee report outs were the reports on that progress. Right? Those were the details of what we've been doing. Okay. What else do I have here? Okay, just go back to the responsibility slide. So I thought I'd just do a quick breakdown of some of the major responsibilities of the different parts of the plenary and IDSG as it relates to the ecosystem framework itself. So all the way from the board, management council, plenary leadership, and committees, we play interlocking roles. At the top, it's setting the directions and the parameters, making sure we're on the right track and viable. And management council is that conduit to the stakeholder constituencies with the stakeholder representatives. And on the plenary side, plenary leadership and committees are working together on the operational management of the plan, developing the deliverables, discussing them, and coordinating between resource balancing and output of the work. So that's my incredibly fast version of this. There will be time tomorrow if you wish to dig into this deeper. If you're around, we'll find some time to talk about it. Next steps. Basically formalize the overall plan, keep the status boards updated and progressing, and keep developing. Adam, did you have a question?
I'm going to apologize in advance for what I'm going to ask and about to say. And I want to ask the audience. This is helpful and good, but who does the audience believe this plan is workable, doable, and necessary for what we need to accomplish this year? Does anybody have any feedback on that? I've received a lot of feedback that we need more details to accomplish the deliverables. So I might just leave it at that and say, if we can have a conversation tomorrow, I really feel it deserves a lot more discussion tomorrow to take it to another level. And that's what I was hoping for and expecting, that in my committees I have pushback that we don't have enough information to fulfill our commitments that are part of this year. I'll just leave it at that.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah, I second what Adam just said. So if there's going to be a session tomorrow, that'd be great. I think you skipped through what I saw may have been a timeline slide or with some dates. So I just wanted to check if you could spend 30 seconds and talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Right. So this slide is a summary of the dates set out in April. in the initial presentation of the plan. You can see that the top 4 components are spaced out throughout 2014. Really is the initial stages to get us in a place where we can start to operate programs. And then 2015 and beyond is the actual implementation and operation. Kim?
So the need for additional detail is completely understood. If you look at the presentation that we went through at the last plenary, there actually were deliverables that were associated as well that has more granularity. But until we have additional resources to support us in being able to get the amount of detail that we need to have and conversations continuing, we think that it's probably not going to be until at least a month from now when we can have a very, very formalized functional model, or sorry, not functional model, but framework to operate from, and then that way we can have our deliverables more aligned. So I think that we're on the right path. We know that there needs to be more detail and structure.
Peter?
Hey, thanks, Peter Brown. Oh, sorry.
Unbelievable. So actually, if you want to go ahead, that's fine. Okay. This is definitely not an effort to be nitpicky here. And Kim, actually, I'm really glad that you made that point that is it not loud? I'm glad that you made the point that you just did. One thing I would say that is kind of within our power as we think about this is some process sort of stuff. So I look at this slide that says develop and improve. So I'm just talking about verbs here, right? Develop and improve, develop and improve, develop, okay? And then if you go back to the last slide, actually, is probably more important on it, that next steps one. One of my concerns here is so I have no idea what formalized means. Debate concepts is, like that should happen, right? But then what? Ground test ideas, I'm not really clear what that means. And you got develop but not approve here again in the certification program. So I understand that like a lot of the details around timelines and things like that's going to take a little bit of time. But a lot of the questions that I hear from folks within committees is, okay, how does this thing get done, even if we do it? Like, how does it become a thing? And so, a lot of that actually is in the verbs and in that process. And so I think that's something that actually, even before those additional resources come along, could probably be nailed down a little more firmly.
Hi. Yeah, just a couple of comments. One, I liked your sort of breakdown of responsibilities from board plenary, board management council plenary committees and everything else. Just to build on the point that Kim made, we need to think, and as I presented to plenary yesterday, how we complement the work that's being done in the volunteer effort here with also additional resources. And I think the role of the board and management council, there is a role there for them ensuring that the resources are available in order to be able to do the work. We should underline again that we believe very strongly that it's the committees and the committees as a group, as committee chairs, that primarily will lead the effort in terms of trying to identify what resources are needed, and the board should take us on more of a sort of a arm's length approach in terms of how those resources are allocated, but ensuring that they are available. So that was one point. A second thing, and it's maybe a little bit, I don't know if it contradicts or complements Mike's comments, and that is, yes, there's a lot of attention about in terms of understanding what we mean by develop this, develop that. I get that. But I think we also need to know what is this thing, more clearly, what is this thing that we're building? Because in order to get to a point that we can mobilize resources internally and externally, bring more people on board to put their shoulder to the wheel to build this, we need a higher level buy-in. And one of the conversations I had yesterday with Sherry Caddy from the White House, who was here and joined us part of the board meeting yesterday, was, she says, it's great that you've got lots of subject matter experts, but we're up to here, possibly with subject matter experts. What we're missing is that sort of governance layer, the people who have that wider business-oriented and organizational level understanding of what is needed here. And I think one of the things that is missing for me, and I take it on as part of our responsibility within the Management Council, is to produce something. Maybe we should do this with the Policy Coordination Committee. I don't know. It's just throwing it out there. Produce something which is the sort of translating the value proposition discussions that we had earlier today into something tangible that we can present to C-suite executives, board-level people, to explain why, for their organization, for their business, for what they do, that getting involved in building this future framework is of value for them and why they should be on board. And I think that's something which is complementary to the building of the actual framework itself.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, the only other comment I was going to make real quickly is just that I hope that we expect the activities like the value proposition exercise, like Peter said, and I saw Kalia standing for a second. I thought she was going to maybe mention that too, that the activities that we did today should also help in driving some of those details, because we want to make sure that the framework that we create is framing the right thing. So I think that all of these are going to be very interrelated. The need doesn't change. Everyone needs it yesterday. We understand that. But I think that the things that we're doing are going to get us in the right spot. Kalia, you were going to say something?
So I think the arc of potential steps to get to an end goal is very good. I also am interested in how we can understand the deliverables that we need to get to, and how we, like we did this morning, potentially crowdsource the answer. Because part of, I think, what our mission is to catalyze, to uncover, and to make real something that lots of people need, but we're like this organizing catalyst to help it happen. And that we also need to broaden the constituencies that we listen to. So I'm hoping that as we understand some of the key deliverables and the key questions we need answers to figure out, like, what should the framework say about X, Y, or Z, that we can have those of you who aren't based in DC host a meeting with some other business colleagues or some regular citizens in your living room and invite them to give us input, so that we're not just relying on people who come to committee meetings, and that we're actually figuring out how some of the voices we haven't been hearing are fed into these next steps as well. And that there's a way in which details, the drive to have details and the need for a clear answers is, I totally understand it, and we also need to make space for the answers to emerge and invest in figuring out how we hear the answers. And I think we can do that because we're having some success with the ways we're doing it. So I think that, that the Management Council work in sort of helping us be leaders of the organization needs to continue so that we can actually achieve these goals.
All right, last comment, Mr. Oh, hold on. Are there any comments online? Sorry, Stuart.
Yeah, there's a comment from Andrew Kia Robbins. Crowdsourcing silences the individuals in the crowd.
Okay. Thank you. Any other ones?
Not directly related. I mean, there's other comments.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I just want to always make sure we try to pull the remote people in. Stuart, last comment, and then we're going to break for the last joint committee meeting session.
This is Stuart Shapiro. This is more of a plea than a comment. I would actually pay money to see a concept map, a concept diagram that shows how the individual pieces of this thing relate to each other. So, for example, you know, various sets of requirements form the basis, form the basis of conformance requirements, and self-assessment assesses against conformance. Whatever they are, I see pieces listed, but even now I'm still not sure how some of them relate to the other pieces. For example, the risk assessment frameworks. I mean, the Privacy Committee has developed the PEM. I know what the PEM currently does. The notion of risk assessment frameworks, plural, in the context of the identity ecosystem framework seems to be larger or somewhat different than that, but I'm not quite sure how or how they function with, in relation to these other pieces. So, like I said, I would give money to see that kind of a diagram.
Given the fact that we have none, I take you up on that. No, but I mean, I totally understand. Our goal is to be able to have much more detail when we have our next plenary in September in Tampa, September 17th through 19th. But I really do hope that, and I expect, and that we will have detail at that point, and hopefully before then. But that will be the stake that I put in the ground, that we will have a concept map. Okay, so we are way over time. Thank you, Andrew, for helping us start this conversation again, or continue this conversation. Next are the joint committee breakout sessions. There are three. Standards and trust framework downstairs in room E. User experience downstairs in room F. And the health and privacy joint meeting in room B111. Is that downstairs too? No, it's around. That's just around the corner, right? So those are the three that we're going to break on. We are not reconvening in here today. So this is pretty much the wrap-up of the day as a group. After you have your joint committee breakouts or your committee breakouts, then the day will adjourn around 4:45-ish. Please, if you need to go over a little bit since we're over, I understand. There is a chairs meeting and debrief at 5. And at 6, there is a social gathering at Bar Louie at 150 Gibbs Street in Rockville. And there is a map that you're going to put up there? Are there copies of the map outside? Oh, in the handout. So you have copies of the map in your handouts, but there's always a great time to have more social gatherings. So that's at 6 o'clock at Bar Louie. I think that is it. I think we're going to put the map up just so you can see it. And where am I in that map? Am I the star? Okay. And where's Bar Louie? So it's very close. If you can read a map, you can make it there. If not, just caravan. We can follow each other. But I hope that you are able to come to the social gathering. So thank you very much. Let's go ahead and take a break and then try to convene in the individual rooms. Lecture room E, lecture room F, and B111.